Welcome. We are here at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons at the David Brower Center in Berkeley, all part of Funding Public Goods Lab Week by Protocol Labs. Our guest is Kim Buisson. She is the CMO, head of marketing at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons. Thank you for sitting down, Kim. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me today. I'm doing well.
Yep. And we're just kind of getting to the tail end of day 2 of the conference. How's it been so far?
It's been incredible. It's the first time that we're running Earth Commons, and really seeing the energy that's coming from having these 2 separate tracks has been really rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just had a great conversation with the other organizers, David Casey, Oranayo, and Beth, as well as a discussion that Tony Lai was a part of. And there's so many people involved in kind of weaving these events together. You and I just met, briefly the other night and had a great conversation. So I was really excited to drop in. And I find, as a starting context, it to be really useful, your background and then how you've just entered into this space with, I would say, some fresh perspectives. So maybe as a starting question, can you help share a bit of summary of what those experiences that have informed your work have been and how you've come into this?
I come from a very different space. My background is in traditional marketing. So I started out in the ad agency world in Chicago. Then I went into luxury marketing, developing products and campaigns, and worked for the #1 beauty company in the world, which was a big marketing machine, and helped me understand the evolution of media and the acceleration of how we consume content. Over the past 5 years, I've been working on Wooden Studios, which is a creative agency. And we work mostly with artists. And lately my work has been about creating narratives of impact and bridging the works of artists, giving them visibility and leveraging what they do to package storylines that we can actually hear. And that's how I was introduced to Funding the Commons and Earth Commons and David Casey. And realizing that a lot of the imagination capital is locked up in the private sector. We were talking about that the other night. And I think one of my overall missions is also to recruit more people into this space and to find out how to get them to also contribute.
And so when did you join Funding the Commons and Earth Commons?
About 2.5 months ago. I'm just getting started.
Great. And so, the climate space has its own sets of language and narratives. And I think many of us feeling like we need to keep evolving those communications devices and messages, because whatever we're doing is not really working. Web3, crypto, it's like the language can be impenetrable, like the numbers of acronyms and technical alphabet soup. So how's it been, the last couple of months for you, experiencing both of these?
It's been interesting, and they're different sets of issues and different sets of things that are actually truly working when I'm looking at the different spaces. I think on the crypto side, what's been interesting to me is that what I used to work so hard to do for brands that are more traditional is already happening organically. So you already have the community, you already have the trust networks, you already have the event schedule and the cadence. You don't have to make up fake events to create word of mouth about your brand existing. So everything's a little bit backwards. And I'm finding that really, really fascinating. The issue with that is that you end up with a community that's only talking to itself. So now I think part of the next wave is going to be not necessarily to reverse engineer it, but how do we keep inviting people? You said, the language is impenetrable. So how do we make it more accessible? How do we also find the right use cases, the right stories, the right narratives that make people curious and make people feel like there is a path for them, whether it's to contribute with their work or to contribute with their communities, or saying, what is in this for me? And I'm not sure that we're answering that today, and that's exciting. On the climate side, it's very cluttered. It's a bit different because the traditional brands and that space has already been playing there. So part of what I'm wondering now is, how do we create cooperation between all of the different interesting projects that are taking place in order to make sure that we are not competing against each other and that the share of voice is actually accumulating the powers of the innovation that's happening so that we can pick which stories we want to go out with and really put the means behind them.
Yeah, because even though both spaces have more collaborative tendencies, I would suggest, than maybe traditional private sector industries, there are still a lot of silos and incentives to, brand and kind of position one's message uniquely in the marketplace. But is what you're suggesting is that we can be more collaborative in the narrative space and in the messaging space as well?
Yes, and it is a collaborative space. I think the collaboration that I'm imagining now is more so sitting down at the table together and saying, what are we talking about this year? What are we talking about for the next 3 months? What projects do we feel are high potential and have this really high narrative value? And how do we bring that forth? Do we make long-form films together? Do we work with a certain set of artists? Do we go in a certain place and do things in a certain way? What does it look like? How do we reinvent media for a few of these storylines that are so powerful and that will trigger hope also? I think that it's a space that's interesting where we're dancing with narratives that are bleak, that are difficult to swallow, and people are more and more desensitized as well. And that's why working with different forms of narration becomes really, really paramount because we can't hear it anymore. We can't hear even, the scientific data.
Right.
It doesn't quite sink in.
Right. Are there examples from the traditional media and branding space that you look to as potential guideposts for what could happen in these realms?
Well, it's interesting. Earlier you said that maybe there wasn't as much collaboration in the private sector, but in fact there is. The heads of different brands get together, even competitors get together to discuss how their industry is doing and how they're handling certain things, and they affect policy together. And even in industries that might feel more frivolous, like beauty, or they sit at the table together very, very intentionally about their media strategies.
So there's little cabal rooms of CEOs planning their marketing campaigns. Is that what you're telling me?
Not necessarily in that way exactly, but they talk to each other. They talk to each other, and they understand that there's a common interest in getting organized. And there is only so much share of voice. And so how do we not compete against one another? And how do we become more intentional? And I think part of what is so, so tricky in this space is the pace at which things are moving. It's not like in the traditional, media space where you're having 15 launches a year or 20 launches a year. We're seeing projects bubble up overnight. We're seeing things accelerate really fast on certain fronts where things come and go also, and that's difficult for an ecosystem to manage. So how do we have the right communication people in place and the right venues for them to have these conversations? I think that's interesting. I keep hearing about soft skills. And it seems like maybe today these specific positions aren't being put on the pedestal that might actually be needed to recruit more people and more eyeballs into the space.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like in crypto, my perception is that the engineering role is so highly regarded and has been so important for just laying down the initial train tracks and infrastructure to catalyze this movement, if you will, but not necessarily the DNA of sales, marketing, user experience design. Some of these other real disciplines that aren't just soft skills; they're real disciplines. From a marketing and comms perspective, how are you thinking about the traditional channels and print media and television and film and versus social media and where we're spending so much of our time online, and how are you prioritizing or kind of thinking about the tensions and trade-offs?
It's a question of means at the moment. If you did want to play in the traditional way, the price to pay, to play, is quite different.
Right.
So that's not even on the radar today, at least for a conference track like the one that we're on. I think the new forms of social media that are emerging are very interesting, and we're starting to think about different experiments that we can play with. I think experimenting is a big part of all of this. We're not pretending to know every day. Every campaign we run is an experiment. Everything is a pilot. And if you can be playful about it, and if you can have the resources to do that, you find out a lot in a short amount of time. And we have a lot of different things to play with, and that's exciting because we have the more crypto side, we have the climate side, we have so many different projects that we have access to. We have the academia side as well, and we have a lot to play with and to experiment with. So I'm thinking more of it as a playground and a testing ground than anything else, versus having a big grand scheme to roll out.
Right. And AI is also a big part of this Funding the Commons track. It's not a space I have as much depth around. Curious how you also are experiencing that realm coming into this.
You mean in marketing specifically? There's something that I tell my teams in general, and it's interesting. I mean, these are just tools at the end of the day. And so the strategic thinking that needs to go in is the same. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out. You know, ChatGPT is not going to spit out your perfect grant proposal. But if you know what you want from it and you have the critical thinking needed, it can certainly get you organized and get you there faster. And it becomes interesting to play with these different tools. But if anything, I think it's creating more clutter that we have to break through, and it creates a need for even better content and even more narration that is derived from actual life experience. And having people tell their stories, I think the work that you're doing, really getting these profiles to explain how they got to where they are, and is becoming paramount. One, to recruit people into the space and to say, I'm inspired, I want to work alongside these people. And two, that's something that AI can't do at the moment. So the lived experience piece, I think, is the most important.
Right.
And with
Although our editor is now dubbing my voice and mistakes in with a little AI emulated voice at times. Soon I feel like I'm going to be replaced. So what about, I mean, one thing that I've been struggling with is to, balance this tension of, I feel an impulse for creating some space and nuance and long form content, because I feel like a lot of the unlearning and relearning that we need to do does require that type of deeper listening and exploration of the texture and the nuance around a lot of these conversations. Like, it's not something that works necessarily in 140 characters sound bites. And yet, our attention is so fractured in the social media feeds, and it's clearly where the audience is. So we've been experimenting with a lot of clips, just taking sound bites from the conversation, saying, if you want to go deeper, here's the full length. But yeah, how do you think about those tensions?
I try to think of how far the person is down the funnel of consideration. So somebody I've never spoken to is not going to want to watch an hour of anyone speaking about my subject matter. So really being able to identify the communities that we're trying to speak to, why we're trying to speak to them, and to develop content that is so in line with what they're ready to hear. And so it's fragmenting our approach to content, and versus, I'm not looking for the sexiest soundbite. I'm looking for the soundbite that one group that I'm trying to reach is looking for. And that's changed the way that we create asset libraries, that we create edits, and that's been helpful. Yeah.
And can you share any of your, I guess, initial thinking or hypotheses around either audience segments or narratives that you're trying to kind of hone in around, or any hunches you have for, any and all language and tell me your secrets.
It moves so quickly that my secrets of yesterday are not the same ones as today. I think through every campaign that we run, we learn new things. And I think identifying the humans that can accelerate the community building is still at the core of what we do, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. So being able to really think of everyone as an influencer. So I'm not looking for people who have massive reach. I'm looking for people who have massive ability to engage others. And that might not look like a lot of followers, but we know that they are such effective leaders at bringing people on board that when they recommend something, everyone's reading that book, everyone's watching that video. So it's really spending a lot of time curating our community and identifying these spokespersons, but in the old term spokesperson, not as in like being the face of a brand. And really restoring that and nurturing that and having events like these where we can expose them to more people and where things take on a life of their own. I think we in media want to control every conversation, every narrative, but it actually happens on its own if you create a space, which is what you were saying earlier, and invite people who genuinely are able to channel these storylines forward.
And so it seems like to me, what I'm hearing from this event is a lot of conversation about public goods, which has been nomenclature in this context for a few years at least, and a lot of people rallying behind that term. I often get mirrored back people using the term regenerative finance or refi in the crypto landscape. You and I were talking about the other night, this word regenerative and regeneration, and, it's got pros and cons and, might become too greenwashed and overused to mean anything. Are there other terms? I mean, open source, of course, is another, part of the conversation here at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons. Yeah, like what else is popping for you?
Something that I'm finding interesting in a lot of the talks that we're hearing over the past couple of days is taking these words and having speakers tell us about how these concepts have been around forever and grounding those in the history of what humans have done for the long, like regenerative agriculture is not a new concept. So taking some of the power out of the buzzword and remembering what it is that is being done and finding the frameworks that have been there since the dawn of time and making sure that we're syncing the right innovation to these frameworks. So it's been interesting speaking to more traditional economists, for instance, even, and saying, okay, what are public goods for you? And how does the work that we do fit into that? And really going back to the root of words, just like the word radical has been reclaimed in a lot of different spheres. I feel like that is a good example of what can happen to these words and how we recharge them with meaning that is useful. So it doesn't just become a greenwash term.
Yeah, because radical is really at the root of something, the etymology. Yeah. My friend often reminds me, AI, it's ancestral intelligence that we need right now. And remembering that there's a long lineage of people and more than, and the non-human kin that we share this earth with. And we're not the only ones at the party. And not like all of this stuff just happened yesterday. So we are part of lineages. What are the goals of Funding the Commons and Earth Commons looking forward 2024? We're just wrapping up this event. I know you're hosting a number of events throughout the rest of the year. But yeah, any kind of comments on strategic priorities for you and how you're thinking about the marketing moving forward?
Continuing to be a bridge for interdisciplinary conversations is always going to be at the core of what we do, and that's not going to evolve because that's really the essence. And I think why there is a specific kind of energy at an event like this. And if anything, I think the desire to pilot more and more ideas and experiments of our own is going to be the next step, and that will give us also further storylines and different ways to bring to light how the innovation works and what it looks like and how this can accelerate positive impact. So that's the goal.
Great. And calls to action for those watching and following along, following Earth Commons and Funding the Commons on all the social media accounts, of course. But how else would you advise people get involved?
Specific to my craft, I think to not think of communications as anything separate from what we do. Everything we do is communication. How you are setting up your internal team, how you speak to your team about what it is that you do, how you recruit even, speakers in your space. Absolutely everything, the way that you package it is communication. So it's not like there's what you do and then this outward stream of thoughts and narration. And it really starts at the beginning of, that intention of why are we doing this and where did we come from or where are we headed? And it should be infused all the way. So I think my call to action is to stop thinking that it's this separate discipline that isn't accessible. I think everyone in your company should be a marketer, a communicator, and should be armed with the tools needed, even if they don't necessarily have the bandwidth. There are so many ways to create the tools that allows every single person touching your project to get the project out there.
Yeah, so well said. Any final words?
No, thank you for having me here, and thank you for creating a space like this one.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. And for more of our conversations at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons, check out the playlists. Links are in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us.
Thank you.